This is the main user interface for the Reichhardt system on the detasselers. It's the cBox, and I think we described earlier the fact that it's a dummy display. All the settings are actually stored in the controller. These are interchangeable. You have a main user interface on top, dial for turning, picking different selections, and you press in the dial to enter or select the current selection. To power on the system, you have the red button for powering off, the green button for powering on. You just click the green button. You also need to have key switch on for it to get power. You're going to see a safety disclaimer. I hit this button immediately, and you notice you get to the main screen here. You have a picture of a tractor, current driving speed, this icon that looks like a corn head with some cornrows. That is our sensor. That means that our steering mode is Tach sensor, so we're steering off the sensors. In other platforms we have different steering modes, such as GPS. This icon, or this value here of 50, that's our steering sensitivity. To change your sensitivity, you just hold this button. Immediately below it, this light will turn on. If I turn the dial, I can change the value. And you can do this while the auto steer is engaged. Once you get the value you like, just tap that button, and that sets it. The next button over, this is our nudge value. To change your nudge, you just tap the button below the nudge value. The light will turn on, and now I can turn and change the value. And you can also do this while the auto steer is engaged. Positive is to the right, negative is to the left. These numbers are not distance measurements, they're simply increments of the sensor. To engage the system, I simply press this big button. It's going to beep once. You'll notice this indicator on the bottom left here of the button lights up, and you'll notice that I get a little light bar icon that pops up. And what's going to happen is, as it feels the rows, this is going to move around. It's pretty active, but it just gives you some feedback showing that the system's running and thinking. To disengage the auto steer, you can push the button, or if you're in a running conditions, you can turn the steering wheel. Also, any active error codes would also disable the auto steer. So I'm going to hit the button again. When I disable the auto steer, it's going to beep twice, and the light turns off. This icon here that looks like 3 pages stacked up on top of each other is our menu. If I just tap this menu, it's going to take me to the icon for the Tach sensor. If I tap the menu button again, I'll go into this menu, and you'll notice right now I have new and old readings, S1, S2, if I turn the dial, S3 and S4. And what these are the new value is the current reading of the sensor. The old value is the stored previous calibration. So if these numbers match up pretty close, you wouldn't need to recalibrate it. You could press the escape button to exit out to the main screen. If I wanted to calibrate, I can either hold the dial or this menu button. It's going to take me to a save screen, and then I just tap the menu or the dial again to save. And at that point, I just press escape back out. So to calibrate the Tach sensor for neutral is really quick. Make sure the sensor's not in a row, they're pointing out straight. I go tap, tap, hold, tap, and that's it. It's very, very quick. Beyond that, those are the main user interface menus: sensitivity, nudge, Tach calibration, engage. There are also error codes possible on this machine. For example, there's a seat switch. If I stand up out of the seat switch for about 3 seconds, and you notice an error code pops up, 1020. That's a seat switch error code. If I sit back down, the error code is still present. What I need to do is toggle the master switch to clear the error. The error clears. Now I can actively auto steer again. And there are several other error codes. So for example, if I disconnected a Tach sensor, I would get an error code related to the Tach sensor having an open wire. If I want to get more access to more in-depth settings, I hold this menu button. Now at this point I have a bunch of different menu selections. I won't go through every single one. At this point I'll just go through how to calibrate the system. So what you want to scroll to with this turn dial is what says pin, and you want to go into the pin icon. And from here you have a bunch of zeros, and there's an access code you plug into the system. Just do it by highlighting a digit, clicking the wheel, turning the dial, and the pin code that we're entering in is all zeros, 6 zeros followed by 7371. So there's that. I just hold the dial. It takes me immediately back to the previous menu. At this point I have access to a few new icons. The icon that we need to go to is what looks like a chalkboard. We call this our Teachin Menu, and that is being used to calibrate our system. If I go into the Teachin Menu, immediately the first icon I see is an icon for a tractor. It says tractor type. If I go into this, you'll immediately see a code. This is the code. On a new system, it may show a different number. You'd have to plug in the code for a detasseler. In the case of this, it would be 130500001. You'd hold this button, and at that point, when I hit save, what it does is sets everything to factory defaults for a Hagie 204 SP. Since this is a working unit, I'm going to escape out of here so it doesn't set back to factory defaults. Another icon on the quick reference guide is the calibration of the pressure sensor. And that is this icon right here that looks like a relief valve. I go into this icon, I go to N for neutral. I would do this in a situation where I have the machine running. I rev the engine up to full throttle, and this value would probably go up to about 210 counts. And in this case, I would hold the button and save the value. S would tell me how many counts above my neutral I can go before the auto steer would disengage. Another icon is this V/N. V/N, if you go into this menu, there's an icon which is a sprocket. And what this is telling me or asking for is how many pulses is the wheel speed sensor giving me per 100 meters of travel. And this would vary slightly from machine to machine, but the default setting is set up already to work very closely with any 2010 or newer factory installed system. If it's 2009 or older, you may need to double this value to 18,500. So we'll leave that alone. Another calibration that should be done is the valve calibration. There's two different valve calibrations. One is an auto calibrate for the coils in the valve. What this does, this icon right here, this measures the load of the valve. So immediately it asks if the engine's off. If I have the engine off, I can't turn the wheels. It's a safety issue. You could also run this calibration with the engine on. You just have to make sure the wheels are clear. You highlight the checkbox, you hold the 3-page button or the wheel, and it starts counting down from 30. And what this is doing right now is it's sending current to all the valve connection points and measuring the load. So that's exactly what it's doing right now. It takes 30 seconds, and at that point it immediately takes you back to the previous menu, and all the stored calibration values are now memorized and stored in the controller. Okay. The other valve calibration looks like a hydraulic valve. Go into this icon. You have left, right, and max. Left and right are the min, we call them crack points for left and right steering. And then the max, as we discussed earlier, is the maximum setting for either left or right outputs. Default's going to be 500. The minute I go into this left icon, it's going to send current to the left output. And right now it's sending 965 milliamps, for example. If I increase this, you'll notice that the value goes up. Turn the dial counterclockwise, the value goes down. And what you can do is start at a low number and creep up slowly until the wheels start to turn, and then go up maybe another 50 counts, save that value by holding the dial and hitting save. In this case, I'm not going to overwrite the existing calibration. Right is the same way. Again, you go in and you can calibrate right. You want to set up so right and left are the same. And the max is 2500 default. We typically leave that alone. Last major calibration is the wheel angle sensor. It's going to look like an axle with two wheels. You have left. You notice this is calibrating left. The top row values is sensor 1, which is on the left, and then the second column is sensor 2, which is on the right. The bottom row is the stored calibrated values for left. I'm not going to overwrite these, but just so you can see, there's what was stored. This is what we're seeing currently. You want to run that calibration per the instructions. Right again, same situation. Go all the way to the right lock, calibrate on right. And then middle. And middle is typically done by driving straight, verifying it's driving straight on assisted, calibrating. And you can verify that with the system on the road. And that's the majority of it. There is an icon right here. It's not listed in the documentation. That is the safety switch. By default, we are using the safety seat switch interface, so this is left untouched. And that's about it. The only other thing that might be good to note, there is a diagnostic menu, D-I-A-G. I go into here, I can see diagnostics for our display, or for the any input to our controller, which would be the tractor icon. At this point, I can get input-output readings for every single potential connection point. And those are all described in the main user manual. Another one would be this eye icon information, and this gives me the serial number and the software version of our cBox, and the serial number and software version of our iBox. And at this point, if I power cycle the system, this will no longer be accessible, the Teachin menu, and a pin would have to be entered in again. And that's it.